Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have affordable ACT and CLT courses that include everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, tons of review questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, built in study planner, and full length practice exams. You can get a free trial at achievable.me and use the code podcast to save 10%. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Paul Glastris, and Paul, I'd love if you could introduce yourself.
Sure, Tyler. Thanks for having me on. I'm Paul Glastris. I'm the editor in chief of the Washington Monthly Magazine, a magazine of politics and policy published out of Washington, D.C., but with a national and international audience. Every year we publish a college ranking that is a sort of conscious alternative to the other big rankings and a very different set of metrics that focus on things that the other rankings don't and we wind up with a very somewhat different set of rankings showing very different colleges at the top. I've been doing this work. This is our 20th year publishing the Washington Monthly College Guide and Ranking, and I've been at this job for almost 25 years. And before that, I was a speechwriter for President Bill Clinton, and we working on education issues, which is how I kind of got involved in all this. And before that, worked at U.S. News and World Report, which everyone knows publishes another, the dominant college ranking.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, we're not necessarily trying to sit here and make this about how bad US News and World Report is, but there are some concerns about kind of how they approach the ranking process and what their rankings kind of reward, right? I mean, I think that certainly there's a lot of reasons why families should look outside of just the US News and World Report in terms of like how they're making their college lists or even making their college decisions. And so, yeah, I'd love to start there. What is the issue with the popular college rankings reports right now? And the kind of what are the things that the like knock on effects from those issues, basically?
Good question. I appreciate it. I'm going to begin by saying my good friend Jim Fallows, the journalist who, for a while, was the editor of U.S. News and World Report and kind of first raised questions about their methodology. His argument, and I think it's a good one, is people should use all the different rankings that are out there. More rankings are better. Each ranking measures a little differently, and you'll learn things. So there's no harm in looking at more than one. In fact, a lot of good that comes from that. And I really believe that.
Mhm.
That said, you are right. There have been many issues raised over the years about the way U.S. News goes about um, putting together their rankings. And maybe the best way that I know to describe how they do what they do, and this is a little bit of a generalization, they essentially reward colleges for three things. Number one, exclusivity, how
Mhm.
few people they let in, right? The more selected
Mhm.
by their lights, the better the college. Now, what that leads to is a set of colleges that most people can't get into because, you know, not everybody gets SATs in the top 1%, which is what you need to get into the most exclusive schools.
Mhm.
And what that also does is select for wealth because the
Mhm.
students who do best on the SATs, though plenty of poor students do very, very well, wealthy students disproportionately do well. And that's because they tend to get the best preparation from the most well-endowed high schools with the most college-educated families, and they take SAT prep courses like the kind, your company provides, and so that gets to the second way that US News rewards colleges is by wealth. How much money literally, how much money does a college spend per student? And that, you know, you can spend a lot of money per student if you're letting in disproportionately wealthy students, right?
Right.
And then the third uh, way they reward colleges is prestige, right? They do
Right.
a survey of college leaders and they ask, what do you think that college 1,000 miles away, what quality do you think that of the education of that college 1,000 miles away? As if a president of a school 1,000 miles away knows what's going on in the classroom in that other college. So
Right.
guesswork based on what you hear. It's sort of like the popular kid in high school, right? The popular kids, everybody knows who they are.
Mhm.
They can't quite say why they're popular. They're popular because they're popular. So there's a kind of a self-referential thing.
Mhm.
And, you know, as a matter of kind of good for the countryness, um, we have real questions about it. And a lot of people have raised questions about it because, what US News and there's a dozen others out there. I'm not picking just on US News. They basically, with their rankings, define what excellence is in higher education. And to give you an analogy, right? If you were ranking restaurants in your metro area, you wouldn't include country clubs, which have very good restaurants,
Mhm.
right? Maybe they have the best restaurants in some way, but you wouldn't include them in the ranking because your readers can't get in there, right? They're private
Mhm.
clubs. When you define the best as things you can't get into, it gives a kind of a
Mhm.
weird pitch to the whole thing. Moreover, if you reward
Mhm.
spending, you get more expensive colleges that spend more money and you know college is already too costly. So there are plenty of other critiques of these mainstream rankings, but those are the ones that really strike us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? And essentially, I think that like standardized test scores, yes, I think that they are probably one of the last kind of fair metrics that exists, but also you certainly can get a lot more help if you have a lot more money, right? Being in a better school that sends more people to these kind of institutions is very often related to your wealth and not your aptitude necessarily. I recently lived in the San Francisco Bay Area and had friends who were teachers there and in different parts of it, and it's pretty clear like which schools are the ones that are sending a bunch of kids to Stanford and which ones are not. And a lot of times it has to do with whether they're public or private and therefore how much money people can afford to send their kids to those schools. And in general, I agree with you that like the way that the rankings are done, or really the way that college admissions is done, like does have a lot of preference and favorability towards the wealthy. I think in addition to that, you're talking about, it's kind of this self-perpetuating thing. The famous schools are famous because they're famous, and then they're at the top of the list and they're famous again. I think that's definitely, an issue, and I think it also kind of reinforces these other parts of like the exclusivity, right, which is oftentimes determined by their admittance rate, or what, I forget what it's called, but it's the rate that people that say that they're going there actually go. I forget what that rate is called. And then there's also, like you said, the where it gets really problematic is with the cost of the schools, right? Because if you've got a very expensive college and it's charging a lot more money, and particularly it's charging full ride, like full freight with no scholarships or discounts to most of its student body, that's going to have a lot more money to spend on things that make it the best school, especially if one of the metrics is how much money it spends. And then that will also perpetuate it being at the top. And then, that last bit, which is what I want to kind of talk about next, is that a school being the most expensive school is not necessarily in the interest of the parents, especially in the parents of people that are like parents that are not super wealthy and have no problem biting a $70,000 a year bullet, like some other people might. It might not be the best ROI on what you can do, essentially.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, so I'd love to talk a bit about that then, right? Like, let's talk about kind of why parents should shift their thinking from just being focused on the top ranked schools to, this sort of more ROI focused approach that you were talking about.
So, it depends on the student and the family. If you have the SAT scores and the wherewithal to get into an elite school, more power to you. I went to a state school, then to a pretty elite school. I didn't find the teaching quality to be all that different, but I definitely got something out of going to an elite school. And we know that if you get into an elite school, you're likely to make more money. You're likely to have a better, you know, professional network that gets you a higher salary and so forth. So there's advantages to getting into an elite school. The point is, take all the highly selective schools together and it's maybe 5% of the undergraduate population. It just isn't a very good help. It's not of much help to the other 95% of students. So the question is, where do they go? What should they be looking for? And,
Mhm.
again, students with pretty good SAT scores who went to pretty, you know, wealthy high schools can get into the second and third tier most selective schools. And again, more power to them. But for the vast bulk of students, that just isn't how they go. That isn't how they select a school. That isn't open to them. Um, and
Mhm.
so you need different metrics to help them decide what are the best schools. And so you
Right.
and so the metrics that I think make most sense are metrics that say, based on your demographics, which schools are likely to provide you an education that doesn't cost too much, doesn't load you up with too much debt, and that
Mhm.
provides a degree that means something in the market. That is, it provides a middle
Mhm.
class or better salary. For a lot of young people, you know, as much as they want a good education to get a great job, they're also looking to follow their passion. They're also looking to find out about themselves and figure out what kind of work really means something to them and to maybe give something back to their country and community. And so, I
Mhm.
believe that those kinds of things are worth looking at too. That's a form of ROI. And there are more and more rankings that factor ROI in. And I think that's been a very
Mhm.
positive trend over the years.
Yeah, so when you're talking about ROI, I mean, certainly lower cost makes it a lot easier for you to have a good return. But like, what are the metrics that you're using to kind of get a sense for ROI? Like, is it like gainful employment numbers or something else? Or like a
Well, at
mix
the
of things?
Washington Monthly, what we do is we use the federal database called iPads and supplement that. It's almost like all of our data is publicly available. You might have to dig for it, but we don't have a proprietary database or survey. And what we're looking at is the information that colleges are providing to the federal government mm, on the demographic backgrounds of their students, primarily their economic backgrounds, um, and their graduation rates, their net costs as they relate to particular income categories. So, what we do is we measure the ROI of a college based on what they're offering the median income family. It's about family of
Mhm.
two with two kids making $80,000 or so. And that provide good ROI to those families and families making less do better on our rankings. Again, it's not just price, it's quality. If you graduate fewer students based on what you would predict from those demographics, you lose points, right? We hold schools
Mhm.
accountable for not just recruiting, but graduating students. And, we look at
Right.
debt levels. And this is all federal data, we look at what students are earning 9 years after, 10 years after they enter college, which, is a pretty good indication of whether the college experience and credential of that college is one that provides a decent payback. What we also do is we reward colleges that fulfill the mandates of their own uh, mission statements. If you open up the mission statement of just about any college, it's going to have language to the effect that the aim of this university is to educate young people to take their place as, productive members of their democracy. And so we measure that. We measure whether a college has a robust ROTC program for students serving their country in the military, whether their students go on to the Peace Corps, whether their students are rewarded for participating in AmeriCorps, the National Service Program. We give extra points to colleges that have high rates of voter registration and that make it easy for their students to vote. Things like that, because we think that's part of ROI. And by the way, Tyler, when I say ROI, we don't just look at the ROI of the student in terms of their tuition dollars. We look at the
Mhm.
ROI of the taxpayer for their tax dollars. And let me tell you why. The government at every level spends $500 billion a year on higher education. That works out to about
Mhm.
$1,700 for the average taxpayer every year. Whether you're in college or not, whether you went to college or not, whether your kids are in college or not, $1,700. So taxpayers have skin in the game too. And we think that
Mhm.
these metrics um, inform not just somebody looking to invest tuition dollars, but also looking to make sure government is investing their tax dollars wisely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all great. I think particularly for me, I appreciate where you're coming from with like the ROTC and voting rates and things like that. But, to put my cynical hat on for a second, I think the parents are probably most interested in the first things you mentioned, which is, cost versus, how much does this increase your income in 10 years? And also, graduation rates, right? Like those are the big three that I kind of wrote down as like I think as a parent I'd be very interested in those. And also, matching up to the demographics that you are, I think it does show like a good fit, probably both economically and to an extent, probably culturally too. While obviously you guys are incorporating all of this, and I think you're a great first place to go, what are some other ways that people can find this information? Like, are these things that are typically available on university websites, or are you kind of either going to have to go to this federal database or go to a website that kind of simplifies it for you?
Yeah, if you've picked a few colleges, right?
Mhm.
You've narrowed it down to a handful of colleges. Then you can go to the federal government's college scorecard and you
Mhm.
can put in key information like how much money does your family make per year? Um,
Mhm.
and other information, and you'll get a list of schools. So you don't need to come to the Washington Monthly to get that information, but it's kind of a pain to have to go to the college scorecard,
Yeah, I figure, right?
all that. So it's a workaround. I honestly think we make it a little bit easier.
Great. Yeah, and then I think the other question I had is like, what are other things that you recommend, like other resources that parents should be looking into to potentially, basically just like give a more complete picture of different schools for parents?
Again, all rankings are good. I'd look at all the rankings and see where the schools you've decided. I mean, if you're the first cut, obviously, got to make a lot of decisions just to narrow down the list.
Hmm.
But you look at all the rankings, and there are plenty of qualitative sources of qualitative information. By that, I mean student reviews, Princeton review, Reddit. Look at all that stuff. Some of it is nonsense, right? It's like you go to a restaurant review and there are 1,000 good reviews about the restaurant, and then one person says, I hated this place because my fork was dirty. So you got to kind of factor that in. But That qualitative
Right.
information is also very important. I mean, little
Yeah.
things like, what's the transportation? What's the childcare? If you've got,
Hmm.
if you're an older student and you've got kids, fees and so forth. There's a lot to look into.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I think also in general, there's just like, sites like Admitsy, right? That like basically serve as a repository for college reviews, and I'm sure there's many others. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly I think that's all important. But like you said, I mean, I think that the biggest thing here is that you should not necessarily just be looking at which schools are at the top of the rankings when those rankings are focused on, a certain type of school. You should be thinking about how school is going to work for you, right? Like making a purchase decision. Like, yes, maybe like the Mercedes is the most prestigious car, but is that really the car that you should go
Right.
super heavily into debt for?
Yeah. Look, in most of the other rankings, the top 20 or 30 schools are always the ones you'd expect: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, MIT, maybe Berkeley, UVA, Duke, et cetera, et cetera. It's the mostly private, but a few public flagship, super elite selective schools.
Right.
Um, and okay, fine. Half of the ones in the top 30 in the Washington Monthly are those schools. But the other
Hmm.
half are schools that probably 99% of your listeners don't know about. They're hidden gems. They're known only really in their regions. A lot of them are what they call regional public universities, right? These are the universities with state in their name. And just to kind of give you a flavor of this, the highest ranking elite school on our best colleges for your tuition and tax dollars ranking, which is the main one, is Princeton. And it comes in at number
Hmm.
5, behind 3 campuses of the California State University system, including number 2 ranked Fresno State. Now, other
Hmm.
than if you follow college football, you've probably, never heard of Fresno State. Um, but Fresno State is, like the name implies, located in Fresno. It more or less recruits students from that Central Valley of California, which is where like a quarter of all the farm products we consume are made, are grown. And that area is pockmarked with quite a bit of poverty. The students that go there are charged very little. I think it's $3,500 a year, some crazy small amount. Their graduation rates are quite high, given that the students come from not privileged backgrounds. They go on and they make good money, not I graduated from Harvard money, but solid incomes. And they tend
Hmm.
not to, once they graduate, fly off and become hedge fund people in New York or Silicon Valley bigwigs in San Francisco. They tend to settle in the same general Central Valley area. And, some of
Yeah.
the students wind up as managers at the agricultural companies where, as kids, they pick crops. That's upward
Hmm.
mobility, right? That's ROI. That's value. And the number one school in our ranking, again, is a school I'm going to guess most of your listeners don't know about. And it's Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. Super interesting school.
I appreciate the example. I think Fresno State's a good example. I guess for me, my then kind of question coming from that, it makes a ton of sense that the way you've structured your rankings rewards schools that are more local, that sort of reinvest their graduates back into the local community. But I'm
Yeah.
also curious if you are outside of these local communities, what's the best way for you to figure out what that school is for your area, right? It's hard, I think, because there's so much marketing to identify like what are the schools that can truly help middle and working class students succeed and like level up in their area and their region. Oftentimes you're probably limited, to a small handful of schools in your general vicinity. Let's call it a I can still live at home car length away.
Yep. Which is
So how
where
do
most students go, right? 60, 70, 80% of
yeah,
students stay within 100, 200 miles. They go to college within 100, 200 miles of where they grew up.
right, exactly. So how would you recommend people discern among those schools that are close to them? Because I'm assuming that maybe not every college is covered by your rankings, or maybe it is, but just like how would you discern which of those is going to be most helpful for your upward mobility?
So we have about 1,400 colleges and universities in our database. That's fewer than exist, but you know, we're pretty careful to
Hmm.
eliminate, very tiny schools and very niche schools. And one of the things we offer, and others too, but this is we have a ranking called best bang for the buck, and we
Hmm.
break that down by region, and it's purely the ROI parts of our metrics. It doesn't include the service parts. So you can go to that, if you live in, the the Mountain West or whatever, the West, you can go to best bang
Hmm.
for the buck West and see all the colleges in your region ranked by these metrics of affordability, quality, and so forth. And what you're going to find, I think, Tyler, is that the sad truth is not every state has a great system of public education. There are a lot of great schools in California on our rankings. There are a lot of great schools from Florida, from New York, from North Carolina, from Texas. Not very many
Hmm.
from Pennsylvania, not very many from Michigan. Um,
Hmm.
and this is because states have very different governance systems. They have very different histories of investing to keep costs low for their citizens. So you're absolutely right. For a lot of people, you're not going to find as great an options nearby as you would if you live somewhere else. But they're there.
For sure. I guess what I was also looking for was like beyond the numbers, right? Like things that are more qualitative that you should look for that are like good things to have, like whether that's like a dedicated career services team or like a career fair that they put on twice a year or whatever it is that you feel like are kind of
Yeah,
the beyond the numbers things that are little things that show that they're really focused on these
yeah.
families.
And here's the thing: there's no database that exists that compares things like that. So
Oh, for
you
sure.
can go to an
Yeah.
individual,
Just more
they have
anecdotally.
a good jobs fair, and you can read the reviews, but you can't know if that college is any better than this other college because there's no standard measure there. And that's
Hmm.
something you're going to have to do individually. But
Hmm.
honestly, if a college degree, if the average income of a person from a particular college is really low, that
Hmm.
is an indication that maybe that they don't do a very good job helping people find good employment, right?
Right.
The bottom line is the bottom line. It's income, right? And there's lots of different things
Mhm.
you can do to help your students maximize their income. And it's the quality of the education, it's paid internships, it's networking. We can't measure the specifics, but we can measure the general.
Right.
I guess the answer is
Yeah,
start
that
with the general and then go look.
right. Yeah, that makes sense. And again, especially if you're choosing things that are close to you, it does limit it a fair bit. Though I know that even, I don't know, I mean, I'm probably not exactly in the demographic that we're talking about right now, but I definitely know that even people that I've been friends with that, you know, they would consider themselves to be like middle or working class. They've sent their kids to different states because, there's a really good fit for a bunch of other reasons.
Yeah.
So it just depends on kind of what your goals are. And I guess that's maybe the last thing, right? This all kind of ties back into building your college list, right? And I feel like, particularly for people that are kind of, not looking at the top 30 US News and World Report ranking colleges, this becomes a lot more of a nuanced discussion around, like, what kind of industry you're trying to go in, like where, what type of place do you want to live in, like, do you want to go to Dartmouth and live in the middle of nowhere in the cold, right? Like, or whatever. I mean, Dartmouth's like obviously an Ivy League school, so that's different, but you get the idea. And so I'm curious, kind of, like, I think that the metrics that you're talking about around ROI and around like civic engagement and things like that are really important. How do you recommend people start building a list that takes those things into account?
It really all depends on the student
Hmm.
and the parents and what they're looking for. I think it is fair to say that on average, the overwhelming thing most students and parents are looking for is a college that provides a decent chance at a secure income. There are a lot of other things, but that's kind of first. And so if
Hmm.
that's the case, you can eliminate a lot of schools that don't do a very good job of that, right? And that kind of
Yeah.
simplified boils it down. You can eliminate like half or two-thirds of the colleges out there and just start with the ones that provide a reasonable return on the investment you're going to make. And that's still a whole lot of colleges. And in a sense, once you do that, your risks of making a bad decision are much reduced, right?
Yeah.
And then you can ask yourselves a whole bunch of questions about how, my commute times. How often do I want to come back home? How important is hiking? Right? All kinds of things that are important to people. And that information is out there. It's not out there in a form that is easy to compare one college to another. But again, if you've got that floor of knowing this is a reliably quality, affordable school, um, you're
Hmm.
probably not going to make a bad decision.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also like you said, I think you've helped in also setting people up with the questions they should be thinking about. And I think the other thing you can do is go ask the schools. Like, at the end of the day, they've got somebody who's answering the phone
Yeah,
who's meant to be taking these questions, and you can tell a lot based on how they answer them,
sure.
and
Go
how
visit them.
serious
Do
they
do
are
all that
about
stuff.
things. Yeah. Well, great. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you wanted to make sure that we covered?
I think the basic points that I've said are the ones that I hope I've gotten across well, which is look at a lot of rankings, get a lot of information, boil down your list to a manageable group,
Hmm.
but just make sure that there are a lot of mediocre to bad programs and schools out there, and you don't want to make the mistake of choosing poorly. And look, even the worst schools are still producing some good outcomes for some students, but you want to maximize your chances of doing well in life by going to college. And I think there's Washington Monthly is one resource, but there's plenty of others.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I appreciate your guys' approach a lot. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing more about it.
It's my pleasure. I really, really appreciate getting a chance to talk to your audience.
Yeah, thank you. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable and Paul Glastris from the Washington Monthly. You can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT and CLT courses by going to achievable.me.